Yo, you see the title of this video? A serious topic, huh? You know what that means. Come on now. Come on. Let's get this. All right, man, let's jump into the video. So you've seen the title of the video. And, obviously, if you're like anybody else, you get emotional about it. You're like, how could you say that? How could you say that trauma is necessary? Or even ask said question. Of course it's not necessary. And you will be right. You'll be right about some traumas. See, there are some traumas that are just absolutely unnecessary, that no one should ever, and I want to repeat, ever go through. And I'm not going to list those traumas because those are some real big things. And those are things that people spend their entire lives trying to get over, or they just don't. And I never want to trivialize that. So those aren't the traumas I'm talking about. In fact, to make this video, I did something I would never do. I did something that was so out of character that you would never catch me dead doing this. But this was such a serious topic, I had to. For the first time for this video, I did research. I looked up so many articles, so many things about trauma. I was looking for definitions of trauma. And the thing that I found was that the definition for trauma is really vague. One of the definitions for trauma I actually found from Merriam-Webster, and in it said, trauma is a very difficult or unpleasant experience that causes someone to have mental or emotional problems, usually for a long time. So right there you hear that description, and it's clear to see that's a very vague thing. So that means so many things can be labeled as trauma. But the point of today's video isn't to give a description to trauma. What it is to ask the question, is trauma necessary? Or if we dive more deeper into what I really mean, is trauma an integral part of the human condition? Essentially, the question is, does everyone have to go through some type of trauma? Like no matter what? Or is it possible, even with the smallest of chance, that somebody can go through their entire life without any trauma? Maybe I'm not the best person to ask, because me and everyone I know has been traumatized in some way, somehow. And what I've seen from my very limited life experience is that everyone's carrying something, and usually that gets passed on to the next generation. And it manifests itself in different ways. It's not a clear-cut thing. Like maybe someone had an abusive dad, and when that person had a kid, they didn't abuse them, but emotionally they weren't available to that kid. And so that kid grew up not thinking that their parent loved them. See, it all always manifests in different ways, and there will always be different factors, and it's impossible to clear them all. You can't have a perfect life. I don't think it's possible to go through life without trauma of some kind. I think it's part of it. That's one of the gifts or curses that life gives you, is that everyone has to go through something, that no one leaves this life unscathed. And part of the reason why no one leaves this life unscathed is because humans are flawed. We like acting like we have it together, but we don't. In the silence of the night, when we're by ourselves and we're sitting in our beds, we know we don't. And it's funny that it's always something that we try to hide. We try to hide our flaws because we're ashamed of them. And the thing about hiding your flaws, even about acknowledging your flaws, is that they're still there. And when left unchecked, they grow and they mutate and they show themselves in different ways. I think, and I have to preface this with I think, because I don't know. Every human has trauma. But just because every human has trauma doesn't mean we are the product of our trauma. See, our trauma helps shape us, but it doesn't define us. In the journey of trying not to be defined by your trauma, what happens if you don't know it's even there? Or you see it in somebody else, but they don't acknowledge that it's there? What do you do? Is it possible to help that person? That's a difficult question. That's a really hard question. It's one thing to try and help someone who doesn't even want help. How do you try and help someone who doesn't even know they need help? Or what if it's you, right? It's just something so normal. It was just how we grew up. We that's how we did it back then. You know what I'm saying? Like back in the neighborhood, we all just, ran around and just hit each other randomly. And you never knew when someone was going to come around and do it. So if you try to sneak up behind me, I might flinch, or, and you're like, bro, I think that sounds like PTSD. You're 45 years old now. You haven't done that since you were 15. But I'm not a doctor, so I can't recommend anything to anybody. Now, I'm not really even trying to give advice. It's more so me asking questions. Like, if it's so innate in you that you feel like it's normal, is it still trauma? There's this thing nowadays where people try to force you to feel a certain way about your own situation, where maybe you tell them a story. Oh yeah, this is what happened, and they're like, oh my god, that's not normal. Da, da, da. And they try to force you to feel like maybe I was traumatized. And I would say that's a case by case basis. I would not make a blanket statement on that, because that would, to me, be very irresponsible to make a blanket statement on something like that, because some of them are trauma, right? Some of them are, but then also some of them aren't. Some of them are just people who feel a certain way about their own situation and trying to project their own insecurities onto you. And that's a very difficult dance. And then that kind of brings you into, maybe it was just the culture, you know? Like, when is it culture? And then when is it trauma? Because every culture, for some reason, because of some traditions, pass on trauma to the next generation. And I don't mean something like a parade. Amongst, communities, there are cultural norms that get passed down from generation to generation. Like, if you want to go very far back, like, you can take the Mayans, for example. And they used to just sacrifice kids just randomly. Like, and that was a traditional thing. Like, they did that every so often. You're like, to appease whatever god, I'm gonna sacrifice this kid. That was like a thing, and that was passed down. Like, multiple generations of those people did it. Or, something that's closer to home for me, like, it's a norm in Black culture to beat your kids. And a lot of people are gonna be like, man, you just soft on what you gonna do? You just be soft on your kids or what? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there's this thing in the Black culture where a kid won't even do something that's that bad, but the parent will still pop them in the mouth, or it's the first resort. The first resort is to violence. The first resort is to beat the kid because they don't know how else to discipline the child, because that's how they were disciplined and that's how their parents were disciplined. And it goes all the way back. And and when I said trauma shows itself in multiple ways, there's a whole generation. I even can admit to myself, there's a whole generation of people where they're like, man, I can't wait to have kids so I can beat them. I can admit that I'm man enough to admit that I even felt like that for a little bit, where I'm like, oh, I went through it, so they got to go through it. When is it enough? When are we done with that? I got another question. Is trauma defined by the person who experienced it or by people around them? And this is kind of rewinding a little bit further back, when you tell a story to somebody and they go, oh, that's a traumatic experience. Oh my God, you went through trauma. Is that something that other people can tell you that that's trauma? Or is that something that you have to come to that conclusion yourself? Like, I think about it, like, who was the first person to tell a soldier that they had PTSD? Like, did that soldier notice the signs and it was like, something's wrong with me, I need help? Or did a doctor come in, tell that soldier that, and then from then on, that soldier was like, oh, I have some type of trauma? And did that trauma exist before that, since he didn't acknowledge it? The honest answer is, I don't know. I don't want to ever come on a video asking these questions, acting like I do know. I don't. In fact, these are just conversations that hopefully one day I can have with people. Are there good things that can come out of trauma? I really had to think hard, and I don't want people to get construed. I truly, like, there's, like I said in the beginning, there are traumas that are completely and totally unnecessary. I'm not talking about those. What I'm talking about is, can anyone avoid some type of trauma? And if you can't, can good things come out of it? One of the things that I find about some of the most empathetic people is that they've been through a certain amount of things. So even if someone goes through something they've never gone through, they can relate to the emotions that person is going through. Most of the time, the reason people connect with each other is because they can relate with each other on a certain level of whatever it is. Like similar experiences or upbringing, or they have similar likes or dislikes. And what I'm saying is, not everyone who goes through trauma is automatically going to be empathetic. What I think I'm saying is that the choice to be empathetic is there because you know how it feels. Like some people, they go through it and then they see someone else going through something similar and they go, well, I got through it. You should be able to go through it. And they don't feel anything for that person. And some people have been burned so bad, they don't feel anything. The only way to know someone's going through something is because we ourselves have some type of subjective scale of difficulty of like, experiences of life, going through life. You're like, oh, wow, that must be a difficult thing to go through. That's how we kind of gauge, but it is subjective. But to be empathetic, it's kind of contingent, either being able to work through or start to work through your own traumas. And kind of to go along with working through your own traumas, kind of brings me to my last question. Is it possible to eventually, after all the things you've gone through, after all the traumas you've experienced, be trauma-free? And the real answer, and the truthful answer, is that I don't know. But because I don't know, I did the one thing I could possibly do with a question like this. I Googled it. And the answer I got, I don't know. I don't know. The truthful answer I got from Google is, nah. See, when I looked up these answers, I got just such vague outlines of anything. Some of them said, yeah, if you work hard and you get through, you could, it didn't necessarily say trauma free, but it's like you can live a full life. And then others were like, no, but you can get through it. And these are like from like doctors. So I don't know if it's possible to be truly trauma free. The way I look at it is kind of like alcoholism, or if you have a drug addiction, like you add in drugs. Drug addiction. You can overcome it, but you always have to be careful when it's around. You can never go back. You can't even have a sip because you can slide right back down. It's kind of how I think trauma is that you can overcome it. You can beat it. You can live a life that's full and happy and full of joy. There can be always those times where something triggers and maybe you don't slide all the way back, but you feel a little pain in your stomach, a little sliver of how you used to feel. But either way, there's good news. Not only is it possible that you can survive the trauma you are either going through right now or went through, but you can actually thrive and live a life that you've always wanted to live, full of joy, full of happiness. And you can also help other people who've went through similar things that you have. And that will also bring you more joy, more love, more peace. Because this is this weird thing with humans. For however selfish and greedy we are, when we do help each other, there's something gets added to us. Something fills us just a little bit. But hey, that's just a human condition. Well, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, this is a conversation. So if you agree with me, disagree with me, let me know down below. And I really appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good day. And I'll see you next time. Dangerous game. Just a moment with the wrong thought. Here comes the downfall like a flood. Like a flood. Yeah, the thinking in the mind. Oh, you could be wrong, you could be right. Yet in the twinkle